The rain-slicked streets of rural Indiana shimmered under the weak glow of Ethan Caldwell's taxi headlights. It was a slow night just like most nights. He adjusted his rearview mirror, catching his tired eyes reflected back at him. A life of night shifts and solitude had carved quiet grooves into his face. Ethan had grown used to the silence of the night, finding solace in the hum of his engine and the occasional chatter of late-night passengers. But tonight was different. As he turned onto a deserted stretch of highway flanked by dense woods, his headlights illuminated a small figure standing by the roadside. The girl couldn't have been older than 9 or 10, her blonde hair plastered to her face by the rain. She clutched something in her hands, her slight frame shivering in the cold. Ethan slowed, instinct battling caution. Picking up a child in the middle of nowhere was far from ordinary, but he couldn't leave her there. Pulling over, he rolled down the window. "You lost, kid?" he called, his voice gruff but concerned. The girl looked up, her blue eyes wide and brimming with fear. She stepped closer to the car, holding out a crumpled piece of paper. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You have to help me." Ethan hesitated, scanning the darkened woods around them. There was no one else in sight. "Where are your parents?" he asked. The girl shook her head violently, clutching the paper tighter. "There's no time. You have to help me before midnight?" The urgency in her voice sent a chill through him. Against his better judgment, he unlocked the passenger door. "All right, get in. Let's figure this out." She climbed into the back seat, her small hands clutching the crumpled note as if it were a lifeline. Ethan turned to face her, taking in the tear-streaked lines on her face. "What's your name?" "Lily," she replied, barely above a whisper. "All right, Lily. I'm Ethan." "Now, what's this about midnight?" he asked, his eyes darting to the clock on the dashboard. It read 10:47 p.m. Lily handed him the note with trembling hands. The paper was damp, the ink smeared but legible. "Help Lily before midnight. The treehouse holds the key." "What's this supposed to mean?" Ethan asked, frowning. The cryptic message only deepened his unease. "They're coming for me," Lily said, her voice cracking. "They'll take me back if we don't get to the treehouse in time." Ethan's stomach knotted. "Who's they?" Lily looked away, her silence heavy with dread. Ethan exhaled sharply, his mind racing. "All right, kid. Let's get to this treehouse. Where is it?" "Near Cedar Creek," she said, glancing nervously out the window. Ethan shifted into drive, the rain intensifying as he sped down the highway. Cedar Creek was about 10 miles away, a secluded area known for its dense woods and abandoned cabins. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than a lost child's escapade. As they drove, Lily remained quiet, her small frame huddled against the door. Ethan stole glances at her in the rearview mirror. She looked fragile, but there was something in her eyes, a mixture of fear and determination, that unsettled him. "Lily," he said, breaking the silence. "You need to tell me more. What's at this treehouse? Who's after you?" She hesitated, her hands wringing the hem of her rain-soaked dress. "Bad people," she finally said. They took other kids too." Ethan's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Other kids? What are you talking about?" "They make us do things," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. "I ran away, but they'll find me. They always do." The weight of her words sank into Ethan's chest like a stone. He had stumbled into something far darker than he'd anticipated. He glanced at the clock again, 11:03 p.m. Time was slipping away. As they neared Cedar Creek, Ethan noticed a pair of headlights in the rearview mirror. A black sedan was tailing them, its movements deliberate. His instinct screamed danger. "Lily," he said, his voice low. "Do you know that car?" She turned, her face paling at the sight. "It's them." Ethan cursed under his breath and pressed the gas pedal, his taxi lurching forward. The sedan matched his speed, closing the distance between them. His heart pounded as he scanned the road ahead. A narrow turnoff to Cedar Creek appeared, and he swerved onto it, the sedan following closely behind. The road was rough, the car bouncing over potholes and debris. The rain made it even harder to see, but Ethan didn't dare slow down. Lily clung to the seat, her knuckles white. "They'll stop at nothing," she said, her voice trembling. "They can't let me escape." "We're not letting them take you," Ethan said firmly. "Hold on." The treehouse came into view, a faint silhouette against the dark woods. Ethan skidded to a stop, yanking the keys from the ignition. "Get out," he ordered, grabbing Lily's hand. The two of them sprinted toward the treehouse as the sedan screeched to a halt behind them. Ethan didn't look back. He could hear doors slamming and footsteps pounding the wet ground. Reaching the base of the tree, Ethan hoisted Lily up the ladder. "Climb," he urged, his voice strained. Lily scrambled up as Ethan followed, his muscles burning with exertion. The footsteps grew louder, and he caught a glimpse of dark figures emerging from the shadows. They reached the platform just as the pursuers arrived at the base of the tree. Ethan pulled Lily close, shielding her as the men shouted threats below. "You're not going anywhere," one of them barked. Ethan's eyes darted around the treehouse. There was a trapdoor in the floor and a dusty chest in the corner. He pried the chest open, finding a set of papers, an old map, and a rusted flashlight. His hands trembled as he sifted through the contents. "What is this?" he muttered. "It's the key," Lily whispered. "We have to find the rest." Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears as the men below began climbing the ladder. "What rest, Lily? What are we looking for?" She met his gaze, her blue eyes wide with urgency. "The way to stop them." The first of the pursuers reached the platform, his face twisted in anger. Ethan clenched his fists, ready for a fight as he realized the night was far from over. Ethan Caldwell's knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of the treehouse platform. Below, shadows moved in the rain, their voices sharp and agitated. Lily Carter huddled behind him, clutching the weathered papers they'd found in the chest. The faint moonlight filtering through the cracks of the wooden walls revealed her pale, terrified face. "Stay quiet," Ethan whispered, barely audible over the rain and the shouting below. The sound of boots on wet earth grew louder, then paused. One of the men barked into a walkie-talkie, his voice cutting through the storm. "They're up there. Send backup. Backup." Ethan's stomach sank. He wasn't sure who these people were yet, but they were organized, and that made them far more dangerous. He glanced around the treehouse, his mind racing. The contents of the chest were spread across the floor, papers covered in strange diagrams, handwritten notes, and a map marked with red X's. "What are we looking at here, Lily?" Ethan asked under his breath. Lily shook her head, her small hands trembling as she held a particularly crumpled note. "It's their plans, places where they keep the others." Ethan squinted at the map, tracing a path that stretched across the state, with clusters of red excess near abandoned industrial sites and remote cabins. A cold knot formed in his chest. This wasn't just a runaway story, it was a network. A terrifyingly large one. The sound of a vehicle approaching snapped him back to the present. Headlights pierced through the rain as an unmarked police car came into view, its siren silent. Two uniformed officers stepped out, their faces grim. They exchanged a few terse words with the men below before shining a flashlight toward the treehouse. Ethan's breath hitched. "Lily, we need to move." She nodded, her grip on the note tightening. Ethan scanned the treehouse for an escape route. The chest contained a rope ladder, frayed but functional. He secured it to a wooden beam, then gestured for Lily to follow him. "Where does this lead?" she whispered. "Down the other side," Ethan said, praying they wouldn't hear the creak of the old wood. "It's our best shot." The two descended quietly, slipping into the thick underbrush just as the first officer's boots hit the ladder. Ethan led them away from the treehouse, his steps careful but swift. The rain helped mask their movements, but he knew it wouldn't be long before they were discovered. The forest was dense, the trees casting long shadows that played tricks on Ethan's eyes. They pressed forward, their breath visible in the cold night air. After several minutes of running, they stumbled upon an abandoned hunting shack. "Here," Ethan said, pulling Lily inside. "Stay low." The shack smelled of mildew and decay, but it offered temporary shelter. Ethan peered out through a crack in the door, watching as flashlights swept the forest in the distance. The officers and the men from the sedan were spreading out, combing the woods. "They're not giving up," he muttered, frustration seeping into his voice. "Why are the cops involved in this?" Lily sat on the damp floor, her knees drawn to her chest. "They work for him." "Who's him?" Ethan asked, turning back to her. Lily hesitated, her lips quivering. "Maxwell Hartman. He's the one in charge. He owns everything, the places, the people. He's the one who—" Her voice cracked and she buried her face in her hands. Ethan's fists clenched. He didn't need more details to understand. The name rang a bell. Maxwell Hartman was a prominent businessman known for his philanthropy. The kind of man who hosted charity galas and cut ribbons for hospitals. The kind of man no one would suspect of running a child trafficking network. "All right," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the fury building inside him. "We'll figure this out. But first we need to get out of here." He unfolded the map they'd taken from the treehouse, scanning it for a safe path. One of the marked XS was less than a mile away. "There's another location close by," he told Lily. "If we can get there, we might find more." Lily looked up, her fear mingled with hope. "You think we'll find the others?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure if the X marked another hideout or something worse. But staying put wasn't an option. They waited until the flashlights disappeared into the distance before slipping out of the shack. The rain had eased to a drizzle, but the ground was still slippery, making their progress slow. Ethan kept his ears sharp, listening for any signs of pursuit. When they reached the next location, Ethan stopped short. It was an old barn, its roof partially caved in, surrounded by a chain-link fence. The air felt heavier here, as if the place itself bore the weight of the horrors it had witnessed. Inside, the barn was eerily silent. Rows of empty cages lined the walls, their doors ajar. Chains and restraints lay discarded on the floor. Lily stared at the scene, her face pale. "This is one of the places they kept us," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's heart ached as he took it all in. The barn was abandoned now, but the evidence was damning. He picked up a tattered notebook from a table, its pages filled with names and dates. Some of the entries had red excess marked beside them. "What's this mean?" Ethan asked, showing it to Lily. She swallowed hard. "The excess, they mean those kids didn't make it?" Ethan's grip on the notebook tightened. His jaw set with grim determination. "We're going to stop this, Lily. I promise." As they left the barn, Ethan spotted the faint glow of headlights in the distance. The unmarked police car was circling back. He grabbed Lily's hand and led her into the woods, their footsteps muffled by the damp earth. The chase was far from over, but Ethan's resolve had solidified. He wasn't just running to protect Lily anymore, he was running to expose the darkness that had taken so many lives. And with each step, he grew more determined to see Maxwell Hartman and his accomplices brought to justice. The abandoned factory loomed in the distance, its silhouette jagged against the pre-dawn sky. Its broken windows reflected the faint glow of the moon, and the faint hum of machinery whispered from deep within, a sign that it wasn't as abandoned as it seemed. Ethan Caldwell parked his taxi a safe distance away, killing the headlights. Beside him, Lily Carter clutched the map they'd taken from the treehouse, her small fingers trembling. "This is it," Ethan said, his voice low. "One of the marked locations." Lily nodded, her wide eyes fixed on the imposing structure. "He uses places like this to hide them." Ethan's stomach churned. The thought of what them meant made his blood boil. He reached into the glove compartment, pulling out a flashlight and a wrench, the only thing close to a weapon he had. "Stay close, and if I say run, you run. Got it?" "Yes," Lily whispered, her voice trembling. They approached the factory, moving carefully through the overgrown grass and piles of rusted debris. The air smelled of oil and decay. Ethan stopped at a side entrance, its padlock hanging open. "They're here," he muttered. Inside, the factory was a maze of dark corridors and creaking metal catwalks. The faint hum grew louder, punctuated by the occasional clang of machinery. Ethan motioned for Lily to stay behind him as they navigated the shadowy space. The sound of voices stopped him in his tracks. Ethan crouched, pulling Lily into the shadows. Two men stood near a large steel door, their conversation low but heated. "They're moving the last group tomorrow," one of them said, his voice gruff. "Hartman wants everything cleared before the weekend." Ethan's jaw tightened at the mention of Maxwell Hartman. The name had surfaced too many times for it to be a coincidence. He inched closer, straining to hear more. "What about the girl who escaped?" the second man asked. "Still looking. Hartman's furious, says she knows too much. If we don't find her, it's our heads." Lily's grip on Ethan's arm tightened. He glanced back at her, motioning for her to stay quiet. The men's conversation confirmed his worst fears. Lily was a loose end, and these people would stop at nothing to tie it up. The men disappeared through the steel door, leaving it slightly ajar. Ethan hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to turn back, but the need for answers pushed him forward. He crept to the door and peered inside. The room beyond was a makeshift office, its walls lined with maps and files. At the center was a table covered in documents and photographs. Ethan's pulse quickened as he scanned the room. This was it, proof of the operation. He slipped inside, careful not to make a sound. Lily followed, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Ethan grabbed a stack of papers, his hands shaking as he read the damning details. Names, locations, transactions. It was all there, a roadmap of the trafficking network that stretched far beyond the factory. "These are their plans," he whispered. "This can take them down." As he stuffed the papers into his jacket, a low growl made his heart stop. He turned to see a large man blocking the doorway, his face twisted in a menacing grin. Well, the man said, stepping closer. "What do we have here?" Ethan shoved Lily behind him, gripping the wrench tightly. "We're just leaving." The man chuckled, pulling a knife from his belt. I don't think so. Hartman's not gonna like uninvited guests. Before the man could strike, Ethan lunged forward, swinging the wrench with all his strength. It connected with a sickening thud, and the man stumbled back, clutching his shoulder. Run, Lily! Ethan shouted. Lily darted past the man, her small frame slipping through the narrow opening. Ethan followed, his heart pounding. Shouts echoed behind them as more enforcers gave chase. They sprinted through the factory, dodging piles of scrap metal and leaping over conveyor belts. Ethan's lungs burned as they burst through an exit and into the night. The factory's security lights flickered on, illuminating the overgrown yard. A black SUV roared to life nearby, its engine revving as it sped toward them. This way. Ethan yelled, pulling Lily toward a cluster of trees. They dove into the underbrush just as the SUV skidded to a stop, its occupants fanning out with flashlights. The woods offered some cover, but the pursuers were relentless. Ethan pushed forward, his legs aching, until they reached a shallow creek. He helped Lily across, the icy water soaking their shoes. We can't keep running, Lily panted, her voice tinged with panic. We have to, Ethan said, scanning the darkness for their next move. We can't let them catch us. Suddenly, the roar of an engine cut through the night. Ethan turned to see another vehicle tearing down the dirt road ahead. Its headlights blinded him, but the driver slammed the brakes, stopping inches from where they stood. The door flew open and a familiar voice called out. Get in. It was Claire Bennett, the young prosecutor Ethan had contacted earlier in the day. She'd been skeptical of his story at first, but the desperation in his voice had convinced her to check out the factory. Now her timing couldn't have been better. Ethan shoved Lily into the back seat and climbed in after her. Claire floored the gas pedal, the tires kicking up mud as they sped away. What the hell is going on, Caldwell? Claire demanded, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. I've got proof, Ethan said, pulling the papers from his jacket. Hartman's running a trafficking ring, and they'll kill anyone who gets in their way. Claire's eyes widened as she glanced at the documents. This is huge. They're not going to let us get away with it, Ethan warned. We need to move fast. As the factory disappeared in the distance, Ethan allowed himself a brief moment of relief. They'd made it out alive, but the battle was far from over. The evidence they carried was a ticking time bomb, and the clock was running out. The quiet hum of the car engine filled the tense silence as Claire Bennett drove down a winding back road, her eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror. Ethan Caldwell sat in the back seat with Lily Carter, her tiny frame pressed against his side. She clutched the damning papers they'd recovered from the factory, her hands trembling. They won't stop until they have her, Ethan said, his voice low but firm. And now that they know what we've got, they'll come after us too. Claire tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her jaw clenched. We need a plan, and fast. I've got a safe house a few miles from here. We can regroup there. Before anyone could respond, headlights appeared in the distance behind them. A black SUV barreled down the road, its engine roaring. Claire cursed under her breath. Looks like we've got company. The SUV gained on them quickly, its high beams flooding the car's interior. Claire swerved to the side, but the vehicle followed, trying to force them off the road. Hold on. Claire shouted as she slammed on the brakes. The sudden stop caused the SUV to overshoot, skidding ahead of them. Claire seized the opportunity, yanking the wheel and turning down a narrow side road. The SUV recovered quickly, its tires screeching as it turned to follow. The chase was on. Ethan gripped the back of Claire's seat, his knuckles white. Do you have anything in this car we can use? Glove compartment. Claire barked. Ethan yanked it open, finding a flare gun. He hesitated for only a second before loading it. Rolling down the window, he leaned out, the icy wind cutting through his jacket. The SUV drew closer, its grille nearly touching their bumper. Come on, Ethan muttered, aiming carefully. He fired the flare, the blazing projectile striking the SUV's hood. The vehicle swerved violently as flames erupted, but it kept coming. They're not giving up. Ethan shouted as he pulled himself back inside. They never do, Claire replied grimly. We'll lose them in the woods. The road narrowed, the asphalt giving way to dirt as they entered a dense forest. The SUV struggled to maintain its speed on the uneven terrain, but its occupants weren't deterred. Gunshots rang out, one of the side mirrors shattering. Lily screamed, burying her face in Ethan's jacket. He held her close, shielding her as best he could. Just hold on, Lily. We'll get through this. Claire veered off the road, crashing through the underbrush. The car jolted violently, but the trees provided cover, forcing the SUV to slow down. We're ditching the car, Claire announced, slamming the brakes. Take Lily and run. I'll hold them off. No way, Ethan said. We stick together. Claire didn't argue. The three of them bolted from the car, plunging into the woods. The darkness was oppressive, the thick canopy of trees blocking out the moonlight. Ethan kept a firm grip on Lily's hand, her small legs struggling to keep up. Behind them, the sounds of the pursuers grew louder. Flashlights cut through the darkness, accompanied by angry shouts. This way. Claire hissed, leading them toward a narrow creek. They waded through the icy water, their shoes sinking into the muddy bottom. Ethan gritted his teeth against the cold, but Lily stumbled, her soaked dress weighing her down. Ethan scooped her up without hesitation. I've got you, he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Claire motioned for them to stop, crouching behind a fallen log. We need to split up. It'll confuse them. No, Ethan said firmly. We're not leaving Lily. Claire met his gaze, her expression hard. If they catch all of us, it's over. You take her and keep heading north. I'll lead them away. Before Ethan could protest, Claire darted in the opposite direction, shouting loudly to draw the pursuers' attention. The flashlights and shouts followed her, leaving Ethan and Lily in the relative safety of the dark woods. Ethan pressed on, his breath visible in the cold night air. Lily clung to him tightly, her face buried in his shoulder. Are we going to make it? She whispered. Yes, Ethan said without hesitation. I won't let anything happen to you. Hours seemed to stretch into eternity as they navigated the forest. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter, but Ethan didn't slow down. He knew better than to underestimate their determination. Lily's soft breathing against his chest was the only thing keeping him grounded. Finally, they stumbled upon an old ranger station, its windows boarded up and its walls covered in graffiti. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. Ethan pried open the door and stepped inside, setting Lily down gently. The room smelled of damp wood and mildew, but it was dry. Ethan searched for anything useful, finding a half-empty first aid kit and a rusted flashlight. He handed Lily a blanket from the corner. Here, stay warm. What about you? She asked, her voice small. I'm fine, Ethan lied. He sat beside her, the weight of the night pressing down on him. You're one tough kid, you know that? Lily managed a faint smile. You're tough too. The unexpected warmth of her words caught him off guard. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something stir within him, a sense of purpose. He wasn't just surviving, he was fighting for something bigger than himself. As dawn began to break, the danger wasn't over, but they had a brief reprieve. Ethan knew they couldn't stay long, but for now, he allowed himself a moment to breathe. Holding Lily close, he silently vowed that he wouldn't stop until she was safe and the people behind this nightmare were brought to justice. The morning light filtered weakly through the boarded-up windows of the abandoned ranger station. Ethan Caldwell sat at the rickety table, poring over the damning documents he and Lily Carter had recovered from the factory. Each name, transaction, and location painted a horrifying picture of the trafficking network. Across the room, Lily rested fitfully on a makeshift bed of blankets. Ethan's mind was racing. He needed help, someone who could get this information to the right people without tipping off the corrupt police or Hartman's enforcers. He thought of James Warren, an old acquaintance and former journalist who had a reputation for exposing corruption. If anyone could help, it was James. Ethan pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. After a few rings, a groggy voice answered. Warren. It's Ethan Caldwell, Ethan said, keeping his voice low. I need your help. There was a pause before James replied. Caldwell? Haven't heard from you in a while. What kind of trouble are you in? The kind that's going to blow the lid off a major trafficking operation, Ethan said. I've got evidence. Names, locations, everything. James's tone shifted, curiosity and caution mixing in his words. Meet me at the old diner off Route 17 in an hour. Bring the evidence. Ethan hesitated. Trust was in short supply, but he had little choice. Fine. I'll be there. He hung up and turned to Lily, who had woken and was sitting up, rubbing her eyes. We've got to move, he said gently. There's someone I need to meet. Lily nodded, her trust in Ethan unwavering despite the danger surrounding them. He packed the papers into his jacket, wrapped Lily in a blanket, and carried her to the car Claire had stashed nearby. They drove in silence, the tension between them palpable. When they arrived at the diner, it was nearly deserted. Ethan spotted James in a corner booth, nursing a cup of coffee and scrolling through his phone. The years hadn't been kind to him. His hair was thinning and his suit was wrinkled, but his sharp eyes told Ethan that James's mind was as keen as ever. Ethan slid into the booth, keeping Lily close. "Thanks for meeting me," he said, his voice clipped. James raised an eyebrow. "You didn't leave me much of a choice with that cryptic call." His gaze flicked to Lily. "This the kid?" Ethan ignored the question, pulling out the papers and spreading them on the table. "This is what we're dealing with. Hartman's at the center of it." James's eyes widened as he scanned the documents. "This is big," he said, his voice low. "But it's also dangerous. You're going up against people who won't hesitate to kill to protect their operation. That's why I need you," Ethan said. "Get this to someone who can take them down." James leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "You're asking a lot, Caldwell. You know this kind of story paints a target on my back." "I'm not asking for favors," Ethan said. "I'm giving you a chance to do what you do best, expose the truth." James studied Ethan for a moment before nodding. "All right. Let me make some calls." Ethan felt a flicker of hope as James walked outside to use his phone. He turned to Lily, offering her a reassuring smile. "We're getting closer," he said. "Once this gets out, they won't be able to hide anymore." But his relief was short-lived. Through the diner window, Ethan watched James pace as he spoke on his phone. Something about his body language, too stiff, too calculated, set off alarm bells in Ethan's mind. Then James glanced back toward the diner, his eyes narrowing. Ethan's stomach dropped. "Stay here," he told Lily, rising from the booth. He stepped outside, his heart pounding. "What's going on, James?" James ended the call, slipping his phone into his pocket. "Just lining up some contacts," he said smoothly. "This kind of story needs the right platform." Ethan didn't buy it. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Who were you talking to?" James's confident facade faltered for a split second before he recovered. "Someone who can help." Ethan grabbed James's arm, his grip like iron. "Don't lie to me." James pulled free, his eyes flashing with annoyance. "All right, fine. I called Hartman's people." Ethan's blood ran cold. "You what?" "Look, Caldwell," James said, his tone defensive. "Hartman's powerful. If I hand this over to the wrong person, I'm dead. But if I give it to him, I might get out of this alive. So will you?" Ethan's fist connected with James's jaw before he could finish. The journalist staggered back, clutching his face. "You're selling out kids for your own skin?" Ethan spat, his voice filled with disgust. James glared at him. "Wake up, Caldwell. You think you can take on Hartman and win? You'll be dead before you get close." Before Ethan could respond, the sound of tires screeching filled the air. Two black SUVs skidded into the parking lot, their doors flying open. Armed men poured out, their weapons drawn. Ethan didn't wait. He bolted back into the diner, grabbing Lily and rushing toward the back exit. Bullets shattered the windows as the men stormed inside. Ethan shielded Lily with his body, his mind racing for a way out. They burst through the kitchen and out the back door, sprinting toward the woods behind the diner. The sound of gunfire and shouting followed them, but Ethan didn't look back. He carried Lily, her small arms wrapped tightly around his neck. James's betrayal burned in Ethan's chest, but there was no time for anger. Survival was all that mattered now. After what felt like an eternity, the sounds of pursuit began to fade. Ethan found a shallow cave hidden by dense brush and ducked inside, collapsing against the cold stone wall. Lily clung to him, her tears soaking his jacket. "We'll be okay," Ethan said, his voice hoarse. "I won't let them hurt you." But as he held her, the weight of their situation pressed down on him. Hartman's reach was longer than he'd imagined, and even the people he thought he could trust were compromised. The fight was far from over, and the odds were growing worse with every step. The cave was silent save for the soft hum of insects outside and Lily Carter's steady breathing as she slept. Ethan Caldwell leaned against the cold stone wall, his mind racing with the weight of their situation. The betrayal by James Warren had shaken him to his core. If even a former journalist with a reputation for taking down corrupt systems could be bought, who could he trust? The faint buzz of his phone pulled him from his thoughts. Claire Bennett's name lit up the screen, her number one of the few Ethan had dared to dial since the ordeal began. He stepped outside the cave, ensuring Lily was safe before answering. "Claire," he said, keeping his voice low. "You were right about Hartman. He's bigger than I thought." Her reply came quickly, edged with urgency. "I figured as much. I've been working on something, Ethan. We need to meet." "I'm running out of places to go," he admitted. "Hartman's people are everywhere." "I have a safe location," Claire said. "And resources, things you'll need if we're going to expose him. Can you make it to Mason Ridge?" Ethan hesitated. Every movement now felt like a gamble, but Claire had been consistent in her commitment to justice. He couldn't do this alone. "I'll be there." Mason Ridge was a small, unassuming town nestled between rolling hills, its anonymity its greatest advantage. Claire had arranged to meet at a retired firehouse she'd converted into a makeshift operations hub. The dim light of a single bulb illuminated the doorway as Ethan and Lily approached. Claire opened the door, ushering them in quickly. "Glad you made it," she said, her voice steady but her eyes betraying her exhaustion. "We've got a lot to discuss." Inside, the firehouse was a hive of activity. Maps and documents covered the walls, while a small team of volunteers worked at laptops and sorted files. Claire led them to a corner table piled with folders and USB drives. Ethan set Lily down in a chair, her wide eyes scanning the room nervously. "Who are all these people?" he asked, his tone cautious. "Trusted allies," Claire replied. "Most of them are survivors or have lost loved ones to trafficking. They want Hartman taken down as much as you do." Ethan studied her, searching for any sign of deception. She met his gaze unwaveringly and he nodded, pulling the documents from his jacket. "This is what we've got so far." Claire's eyes widened as she flipped through the pages. "This is gold," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "With this, we can start connecting the dots between Hartman's businesses and the trafficking ring." "But it's not enough," Ethan said. "They've got police, enforcers, and who knows what else on their side. Every step we take, they're one step ahead." Claire nodded grimly. "That's why we need to be smarter. I've been building a case for months, but your evidence gives us something I've been missing: direct links. If we can compile enough, we can force the Attorney General's office to act." Ethan crossed his arms. "And how do we stay alive long enough to do that?" Claire gestured toward a whiteboard filled with lists of names and organizations. "By staying unpredictable. I've got backup safe houses, encrypted communications, and a network of informants. But this also means we're walking a razor's edge. If they find us, we're done." From her chair, Lily piped up, her voice small but steady. "Why are you helping us?" Claire knelt beside her, meeting her gaze with a soft smile. "Because I've seen too many kids like you hurt by people like Hartman. And I'm tired of it." Lily studied her for a long moment before nodding, seemingly reassured. Ethan felt a flicker of hope, something he hadn't allowed himself in days. The next few days passed in a blur of strategizing and reconnaissance. Ethan worked closely with Claire, reviewing Hartman's financial records and cross-referencing them with the documents they'd recovered. The scale of the operation was staggering: shipping routes disguised as humanitarian aid, front companies laundering profits, and bribes funneled to key officials. But with every breakthrough came a reminder of the danger. On the third night, one of Claire's informants reported seeing unfamiliar vehicles circling Mason Ridge. "They're closing in," Claire warned, her voice taut with worry. "We'll need to move soon." That evening, Ethan found himself alone with Lily in one of the firehouse's quiet corners. She was coloring with supplies Claire had provided, her concentration a small island of peace amid the chaos. "You okay, kid?" he asked, sitting beside her. She nodded, though her eyes betrayed her fatigue. "Are we going to stop them?" Ethan hesitated. "We're going to try. And we're not alone anymore. Claire's good at this." Lily looked up at him, her expression earnest. "You're good too. You're brave." Ethan swallowed hard, her words hitting him unexpectedly. "Thanks, kid. That means a lot." Their moment was interrupted by Claire, who approached with a grim expression. "We've got a problem." She led them to a small monitor showing live security footage of the firehouse's perimeter. Two black SUVs were parked down the street, their occupants lingering suspiciously. "They found us," Claire said. Ethan's pulse quickened. "What's the plan?" "We evacuate," Claire said. "There's a secondary location about 20 miles west. We've got vehicles ready." The team sprang into action, gathering files and equipment with practiced efficiency. Claire handed Ethan a small backpack. "Take Lily and get in the lead car. I'll follow with the others." "What about you?" Ethan asked, concern lacing his voice. "I'll be right behind you," Claire promised. "But you two are the priority. If something happens, keep moving." Ethan didn't like it, but he knew better than to argue. He scooped Lily into his arms and headed for the car. As they sped away, he glanced back at the firehouse, its lights now extinguished. Claire's determination was their best chance, but it had also put a target on her back. The convoy moved swiftly, their headlights off to avoid detection. Ethan kept his eyes on the road ahead, his grip on the wheel tight. Every mile felt like borrowed time, but for the first time in days he dared to believe they might make it. Behind him, Claire's vehicle followed closely, its taillights a reassuring presence. But as they approached the next safe house, the sound of gunfire shattered the fragile calm. Ethan slammed on the brakes, his heart sinking as he saw Claire's car careen off the road. "Stay down, Lily," he shouted, pulling her into the footwell as bullets whizzed past. He scrambled for his phone, dialing Claire's number. The line crackled before her voice came through, strained but steady. "Keep going, Ethan. Don't stop." "But," he started. "No buts," she snapped. "Get Lily to safety. I'll hold them off." The connection cut off, leaving Ethan with no choice but to obey. With a heavy heart, he floored the gas pedal, the safe house now their only hope. As the SUV disappeared into the night, Ethan's mind raced with plans. Claire's bravery had bought them time, but he knew the fight was far from over. Hartman's shadow loomed larger than ever, and the cost of justice was only beginning to reveal itself. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the sprawling estate at the edge of Cedar Ridge. The towering wrought iron gates stood like sentinels before the vast property, their spikes gleaming faintly in the pale light. Ethan Caldwell crouched in the dense underbrush with Claire Bennett beside him. Their breaths were shallow as they surveyed the estate, the final stronghold of Maxwell Hartman's trafficking ring. "This is it," Claire whispered, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "We've got one shot. Are you ready?" Ethan nodded, gripping the crowbar he'd taken from their makeshift arsenal. "Let's end this." Behind them, a small group of Claire's allies waited, each equipped with whatever tools and weapons they could scavenge. The plan was desperate, hastily pieced together after weeks of running and gathering evidence. But the stakes had never been higher. Inside the estate, Lily Carter and several other children were being held, waiting to be moved to an unknown location. Ethan glanced at Claire, her face illuminated by the faint glow of her phone as she checked the map one last time. "There's a service entrance on the east side," she said. "It's the least guarded, but we'll need to move fast. Once they realize we're here, they'll lock everything down." Ethan tightened his grip on the crowbar. "Let's go." The group moved silently, their shadows blending with the trees as they approached the service entrance. Claire signaled for them to stop, her hand raised. A guard leaned against the gate, his attention split between his phone and the cigarette dangling from his lips. Ethan acted quickly, darting forward and knocking the man out with a swift blow. He caught the guard before he could hit the ground, lowering him gently to avoid noise. Claire retrieved the keycard from the guard's pocket and swiped it at the gate's control panel. The gate clicked open. The group slipped inside, navigating the maze of paths and hedges that led to the main building. The estate was deceptively quiet, but Ethan knew better than to trust the calm. These were seasoned criminals, every move needed to count. As they reached the back of the main house, the sound of muffled voices and faint laughter drifted through an open window. Ethan peered inside, spotting two guards near a side door. He motioned for Claire, who nodded and gestured for two others to follow her. They approached the guards with precision, taking them down swiftly and silently. Ethan and Claire slipped through the door, their team fanning out behind them. Inside, the estate was lavish but cold, its ornate furnishings and marble floors masking the atrocities committed within its walls. Claire pointed to a staircase leading down. "The basement. That's where they'll be." As they descended, the faint hum of machinery grew louder, accompanied by the occasional sound of footsteps. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a dimly lit corridor lined with heavy steel doors. Ethan's heart pounded as he approached the first door. He forced it open with the crowbar, revealing a small, sterile room with a single bed and no windows. It was empty, but the sight of it sent a chill down his spine. "The kids are here somewhere," Claire said. "Keep moving." They continued down the corridor, opening doors and finding room after room of barren cells. Finally, from behind one of the doors, they heard muffled sobs. Ethan's pulse quickened as he pried it open. Inside, Lily sat huddled in a corner, her face streaked with tears. She looked up, her eyes widening in relief when she saw Ethan. "You came," she whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan rushed to her, pulling her into his arms. "I told you I'd find you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Claire knelt beside them. "Lily, are there others?" Lily nodded, pointing down the hall. "They're in the big room at the end." Ethan handed Lily to one of the volunteers, who wrapped her in a blanket and carried her toward the exit. "Get her out of here," Ethan said. "We'll get the others." He and Claire moved quickly, following Lily's directions. The large room at the end of the hall was locked with an electronic keypad. Claire pulled out a portable hacking device, her fingers flying over the controls. The lock beeped and the door slid open. Inside they found a group of children, their eyes wide with fear. The sight was overwhelming. Ethan's chest tightened as he counted at least 10, ranging from toddlers to teenagers. "It's okay," he said, his voice gentle. "We're here to help." As they began ushering the children out, the alarm finally sounded, a blaring klaxon that echoed through the estate. "They know we're here," Claire said. "We need to move." The corridors filled with chaos as guards swarmed the basement. Ethan and Claire fought their way through, using every ounce of strength and ingenuity to protect the children. Ethan swung his crowbar with precision, his desperation driving him forward. They reached the stairs where a group of Claire's allies waited, forming a protective line. "Go," one of them shouted. "We'll hold them off." Ethan and Claire herded the children up the stairs and toward the service entrance, their path littered with the bodies of unconscious guards. As they neared the gate, the roar of engines signaled that reinforcements were arriving. "We're not going to make it," Claire said, her voice tight with fear. "Yes, we are," Ethan said, his jaw set. "Get the kids through. I'll hold them off." Claire started to protest, but the determination in Ethan's eyes silenced her. "Don't be a hero, Caldwell," she said, her voice breaking. Ethan managed a faint smile. "Too late for that." He turned back toward the estate as Claire and the children slipped through the gate. The first wave of reinforcements arrived, their flashlights cutting through the night. Ethan gripped his crowbar tightly, ready to fight. The battle was brutal. Ethan's body ached with every blow, but he didn't stop. He bought precious seconds for Claire and the children to escape, his determination fueled by the promise he'd made to Lily. Finally, as exhaustion threatened to overtake him, a blinding flash of lights filled the courtyard. Police sirens wailed as Claire's call to the Attorney General's office paid off. Officers flooded the estate, arresting the remaining guards and securing the area. Ethan collapsed to his knees, his vision swimming. He felt hands on his shoulders pulling him to his feet. Claire's voice reached him through the haze. "You did it, Ethan. We got them." As the night gave way to dawn, the children were loaded into ambulances and Maxwell Hartman's empire began to crumble. The cost had been high, but Ethan knew it had been worth it. They had saved lives and they had struck a blow against the darkness. The aftermath of the rescue felt surreal. Ethan Caldwell sat in a hospital waiting room, a bandage wrapped tightly around his shoulder from a deep cut he'd received during the chaotic escape. Beside him, Claire Bennett pored over the evidence they had salvaged from Maxwell Hartman's estate. Despite her exhaustion, her resolve was unshaken. "This is enough," Claire said, her voice steady but edged with the gravity of the situation. "We can take Hartman down with this. Names, accounts, transactions, it's all here." Ethan glanced at her, his face lined with weariness. "Do you think it'll stick? People like him have a way of slipping through the cracks." Claire's jaw tightened. "Not this time. We've got children's testimonies, documents, and video surveillance from the estate. It's airtight." As if on cue, her phone buzzed. She answered quickly, her expression growing grim as she listened. "Understood. I'll be there." She hung up, turning to Ethan. "Hartman's been arrested. He's being arraigned tomorrow?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, the tension in his chest easing slightly. But the look in Claire's eyes told him the fight was far from over. The next morning, the courthouse buzzed with activity. Reporters lined the steps, their cameras flashing as Maxwell Hartman was led inside in handcuffs. His face remained impassive, but Ethan saw the flicker of anger in his eyes. Hartman wasn't used to being on the defensive, and it showed. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Claire sat at the prosecution's table, flanked by her team of assistants. Ethan sat behind her, his presence a quiet reminder of the stakes. Across the aisle, Hartman's defense team, a group of high-powered attorneys, was already hard at work, filing motions and objections. The arraignment was only the beginning, but it set the tone for what was to come. Claire presented the key evidence: the recovered documents, video footage from the estate, and testimonies from the rescued children. It was damning, and the judge denied Hartman bail, citing the severity of the charges. As the courtroom emptied, Ethan approached Claire. "You were solid in there." Claire gave a small smile. "That was the easy part. The trial will be the real test." Over the following weeks, the case against Hartman gained momentum. Claire worked tirelessly, coordinating with law enforcement to secure additional witnesses and evidence. But the pushback was immediate and relentless. Threats arrived in the form of anonymous messages, shadowy figures trailing her car, and even a break-in at her office. Each incident was designed to intimidate, but Claire refused to back down. Ethan stayed close, his protective instincts heightened. "They're trying to scare you," he said one evening as they reviewed case files in a safe house. "But they wouldn't be doing this if they weren't afraid of what you have." Claire looked up from her notes, her eyes hard. "Fear is their weapon, but it won't work on me." The threats soon escalated to bribes. Hartman's allies reached out to Claire's colleagues and superiors, offering exorbitant sums to have the case dismissed. Some wavered, but Claire's reputation and persistence kept the team together. One night, as Ethan walked into the safe house, he found Claire staring at her phone, her face pale. "What's wrong?" he asked. She handed him the phone. The screen displayed a text message: "Drop the case or the next child will be on you." Ethan's hands clenched into fists. "They're desperate. That means you're close to something big." Claire nodded, her voice firm despite the fear in her eyes. "We have to finish this." The trial began in earnest a month later, with Hartman facing a barrage of charges ranging from human trafficking to money laundering. Claire's opening statement was powerful, laying out the scope of Hartman's crimes and the lives he had destroyed. The jury was visibly shaken as she detailed the evidence. Ethan attended every session, his presence a steady source of support for Claire and the rescued children who testified. Lily Carter's testimony was particularly harrowing, her small voice recounting the horrors she had endured. The courtroom was silent as she finished, her bravery leaving a profound impact. But Hartman's defense team was ruthless, attacking the credibility of the witnesses and casting doubt on the evidence. They painted Hartman as a philanthropist whose wealth made him a target for false accusations. Claire countered with precision, dismantling each argument with facts and testimony. Her ability to remain calm under pressure impressed even Ethan, who had grown accustomed to her tenacity. The trial stretched on for weeks, the tension mounting with each passing day. Outside the courthouse, protests erupted, with demonstrators demanding justice for the children. The case had captured national attention, and the pressure on both sides was immense. As the trial neared its conclusion, Claire delivered a closing argument that left no room for doubt. "Maxwell Hartman is not a victim," she said, her voice resonating through the courtroom. "He is a predator who exploited the vulnerable for his gain. Justice demands accountability not for the powerful but for the powerless." The jury deliberated for 3 days, the weight agonizing for Ethan and Claire. When the verdict was finally read, the courtroom was packed. "Guilty," the foreperson announced, the word echoing in the silence. Ethan exhaled, the tension in his chest releasing in a rush of relief. Claire allowed herself a small smile, her shoulders sagging with exhaustion. Hartman's expression remained unreadable as the judge ordered him remanded to custody pending sentencing. Outside, the crowd erupted in cheers. Reporters swarmed Claire as she exited the courthouse, but she waved them off, her focus on the survivors who had braved the trial to tell their stories. Ethan approached her, his expression one of quiet gratitude. "You did it?" Claire shook her head. "We did it." As the crowd celebrated, Ethan knew the fight wasn't over. There were more like Hartman out there, more lives to save and more battles to fight. But for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to feel hope. The courtroom was packed, the weight of anticipation hanging heavy in the air. Maxwell Hartman sat at the defense table, his demeanor cool and composed, a faint smirk playing on his lips. He wore the confidence of a man who had evaded justice his entire life. Opposite him sat Claire Bennett, her expression steely, the fire in her eyes betraying the sheer determination behind her calm exterior. Ethan Caldwell sat in the gallery, his jaw tight. It wasn't his first time in this courtroom, but it was the first time he felt the full gravity of what was at stake. Beside him sat Lily Carter, her small frame dwarfed by the wooden bench. Her presence was a testament to resilience, and her bravery would soon be tested in front of a room full of strangers. The trial had already become a media sensation, dubbed by pundits as the trial of the century. It wasn't just Hartman's wealth and influence that drew attention. It was the shocking revelation of a sprawling child trafficking network with tendrils reaching into law enforcement, politics, and big business. The trial wasn't just about Hartman, it was about exposing the corruption that had allowed him to operate unchecked for so long. Claire's opening statement was a masterclass in legal precision. She began by painting a picture of the trafficking operation, sparing no detail in describing its horrors. She outlined how Hartman had used his wealth and power to construct a facade of philanthropy, hiding his crimes in plain sight. "This trial isn't just about Maxwell Hartman," she said, her voice resonating through the courtroom. "It's about the lives he destroyed, the systems he corrupted, and the children he stole from their families. Justice is long overdue." The prosecution's first witnesses were investigators who had uncovered key elements of the trafficking network. They presented financial records, surveillance footage, and communication logs that linked Hartman to his accomplices. The evidence was overwhelming, but Claire knew the heart of her case lay in the testimonies yet to come. Ethan was the first key witness. As he took the stand, he felt the eyes of the courtroom on him. Hartman's attorneys had tried to discredit him in pretrial motions, labeling him a vigilante with questionable motives. But Ethan knew the truth, and he intended to tell it. Claire approached him, her voice firm but empathetic. "Mr. Caldwell, can you tell the court how you first became involved in this case?" Ethan recounted the night he found Lily on the side of the road, his voice steady despite the memories clawing at him. He described the cryptic note, the chase through the woods, and the discovery of the trafficking network. He spoke of the factory, the estate, and the children he had seen caged like animals. When Claire asked about the danger he faced, Ethan hesitated, glancing toward Lily. "I did what I had to do," he said finally. "Those kids didn't have anyone else." The defense attorney, a sharp-suited man with a voice as slick as oil, rose for cross-examination. "Mr. Caldwell, isn't it true that you acted without proper authorization? That you put yourself and others at risk?" "I acted because no one else was," Ethan shot back, his voice firm. "And I'd do it again?" The defense tried to rattle him with insinuations about his background, but Ethan stood his ground. By the time he stepped down, it was clear his testimony had struck a chord with the jury. Lily's testimony was next. Claire had prepared her as much as possible, but nothing could fully erase the fear of standing before so many strangers. Ethan squeezed her hand as she passed, offering a reassuring smile. On the stand, Lily's small voice carried the weight of her experience. She described how she and the other children had been taken, how they were moved from place to place, and how Hartman's enforcers ensured their silence with threats and violence. Her words painted a vivid and horrifying picture of the network's operations. "Do you see the man responsible for this?" Claire asked gently. Lily pointed to Hartman, her hand trembling. "It's him." The courtroom fell silent, the gravity of her words hanging in the air. The defense's cross-examination was merciless, but Claire's objections kept the worst of it at bay. Lily's composure wavered but never broke. Her bravery left an indelible impression on everyone present. As the trial progressed, more witnesses took the stand. Survivors, whistleblowers, and even former employees of Hartman's companies who had turned against him. Each testimony peeled back another layer of Hartman's carefully constructed image, revealing the rot underneath. The prosecution also presented evidence of systemic complicity. Emails and financial records linked Hartman to corrupt police officers, politicians, and corporate executives. The network was vast, and the revelations sent shockwaves far beyond the courtroom. Hartman's defense team fought back with every tool at their disposal. They attacked the credibility of witnesses, questioned the validity of the evidence, and painted Hartman as a victim of a coordinated smear campaign. But the prosecution's case was too strong, the evidence too damning. In her closing argument, Claire stood before the jury, her voice unwavering. Maxwell Hartman believed he was untouchable. He used his power to exploit the vulnerable and silence those who stood in his way. But today you have the power to prove him wrong. Today you can show that justice is not reserved for the privileged. It belongs to everyone. The defense's closing argument was a desperate attempt to sow doubt, but the jury's expression suggested the damage had been done. Hartman's facade had crumbled and his guilt was clear. The jury deliberated for 4 tense days. During that time, the media frenzy reached its peak. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, demanding accountability not just for Hartman but for everyone complicit in his crimes. When the verdict finally came, the courtroom was silent as the foreperson read the decision. Guilty on all counts? Ethan exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Beside him, Claire closed her eyes briefly, a flicker of relief breaking through her stoic exterior. The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps, the weight of the moment sinking in. As Hartman was led away in handcuffs, his smirk finally replaced by a scowl, Ethan turned to Claire. "You did it?" She shook her head. "We did it. All of us." Outside the courthouse, the crowd cheered as the news spread. Reporters clamored for statements, but Claire waved them off, her focus on the survivors. Lily stood beside Ethan, her hand in his, her small smile a testament to the strength she had found amid the darkness. The trial had been a battle for justice, and though the scars it left would take time to heal, the verdict was a victory. It wasn't just about taking down Maxwell Hartman, it was about proving that even the most powerful could be held accountable. Ethan knew the fight wasn't over. There were still pieces of the network to dismantle, still children to rescue. But for now there was hope, and hope was enough. The sun rose over the city, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. Ethan Caldwell stood on the steps of the courthouse, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The trial of Maxwell Hartman was over, but its impact lingered in the air like the echoes of a distant storm. It wasn't just a victory in court, it was a seismic shift, a crack in the foundation of a deeply corrupt system. Beside him, Claire Bennett emerged from the building, a folder of documents clutched in her hands. Her face, though weary, carried a faint smile of triumph. "It's official," she said, handing Ethan a paper. "Hartman's sentencing is set. Life without parole." Ethan nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. One less monster out there. Claire glanced at him, her expression softening. "You did more than take down a monster, Ethan. You gave those kids a chance to rebuild their lives." In the weeks following the trial, Ethan threw himself into the work of recovery and reform. With Claire's help, he co-founded the Caldwell Bennett Foundation, dedicated to supporting survivors of trafficking. The foundation provided safe housing, therapy, education, and legal assistance. Its mission was simple but profound: to give survivors the tools they needed to reclaim their lives. Ethan worked tirelessly, meeting with lawmakers to advocate for stronger anti-trafficking legislation and harsher penalties for offenders. He shared his story with community groups and schools, raising awareness about the signs of trafficking and the importance of vigilance. Through it all, Lily Carter remained a constant in his life. Under the foundation's care, she began to thrive, her natural curiosity and intelligence shining through as she adjusted to a sense of safety and stability. Ethan couldn't help but marvel at her resilience. One evening, as they sat on a park bench overlooking a serene lake, Lily turned to him. "Do you think they'll ever catch all the bad guys?" Ethan considered her question, his heart heavy but hopeful. "Maybe not all of them," he admitted. "But everyone we do catch makes the world a little safer." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "You made it safer for me?" Ethan smiled, his chest tightening with emotion. "You're the bravest kid I've ever met, Lily. Don't ever forget that." The foundation's work quickly gained national attention. Donations poured in, enabling them to expand their reach. Ethan often found himself in rooms filled with influential people, politicians, philanthropists, and activists, advocating for systemic change. But despite the growing recognition, he never lost sight of the faces behind the numbers: the children who had been saved and the ones still waiting for rescue. One afternoon, Claire approached him with news that reignited the fire in his chest. "We've identified 3 new locations linked to Hartman's network," she said, laying a map on the table. "The arrests from the trial are leading us to the rest of the chain." Ethan studied the map, his jaw tightening. "Then we keep going." As the months turned into a year, Ethan's life transformed. The man who had once driven a taxi through the quiet streets of Indiana now stood at the forefront of a movement. His past as an unassuming cab driver felt distant, replaced by a sense of purpose that fueled him each day. But even as he pushed forward, he found moments of stillness. One evening, after a long day at the foundation, he returned to his modest apartment to find Lily waiting for him. She held up a crayon drawing, her smile shy but proud. "It's us," she said, handing it to him. The picture depicted Ethan, Claire, and Lily standing beneath a bright sun, surrounded by a group of smiling children. Above them, the words "A New Dawn" were scrawled in bold letters. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat as he looked at the drawing. "It's perfect," he said, pulling her into a hug. The story of Maxwell Hartman's downfall continued to ripple across the nation. Laws were passed, agencies were reformed, and awareness campaigns reached every corner of the country. The foundation's hotline became a lifeline for countless victims, a beacon in the dark. Through it all, Ethan remained grounded. He knew the fight against trafficking was far from over, but the victories they had achieved gave him hope. Each child saved, each survivor supported, was a step closer to a world where such horrors could no longer thrive. As he stood in the foundation's new headquarters, a bustling hub of activity and compassion, Ethan watched as Lily helped another young survivor adjust to her new surroundings. Her laughter filled the room, a sound that carried the promise of brighter days ahead. Claire joined him, a coffee in hand. "We've come a long way," she said, her voice tinged with pride. Ethan nodded. "And we've still got a long way to go." Claire smiled. "Good thing we've got time." Ethan's gaze returned to Lily, who was now playing a game with a group of children. In her, he saw the embodiment of the future they were fighting for, a future where courage and compassion could overcome even the darkest shadows. As the sun set on the horizon, casting a warm glow over the bustling foundation, Ethan allowed himself a rare moment of peace. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in a long while, he was certain of one thing: they were making a difference. And that was enough. Ethan's journey was one of transformation, bravery, and sacrifice. His choices shaped the lives of many, but they came at a personal cost. What would you have done in Ethan's situation? Would you have risked everything to fight a system as corrupt and dangerous as Hartman's network? Do you feel justice was truly served in the story? Or do you think there was more that could have been done to ensure long-term change? What are your thoughts on Lily's resilience? How do you think her journey represents the strength needed to rebuild after trauma? Your perspective matters, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more compelling and emotional narratives. Your engagement means everything to us. It helps amplify the message of courage, justice, and hope.